Right. So I want to thank the team, the Edith team, for this invitation. I really appreciate this chance to be part of the program and to share with the audience some of my thoughts on tectonic geomorphology. But I've also really enjoyed the conversations, and I think it's really important to me that this idea of this community, that we come together and share our ideas and support each other. So I really appreciate what you have done. So what I want to talk about is so sharpening our view of active faults is kind of a generic title, but it means maybe I got some new glasses, and as I put my new glasses on, I can see better, and I might use the topography or the geomorphology as the lens for understanding faulting. And so the 3 points I want to make are that we can improve the deformation rate characterization in time and space using topographic metrics. We can decrease epistemic uncertainty with surface process explorations, and we can exploit geomorphology to improve understanding of fragile geologic features. And so those are the three things I'm going to talk about then are interacting surface and tectonic processes. From this may be an old story from the Dragon's Back pressure ridge, but it reappears every now and then. And then the second topic is is surface process modeling to enhance understanding of offset channel markers. And then the third one is machine learning, robot mapping, and particle dynamics in 2 and 3D for fault scarps and precariously balanced rocks. So I just wanted to, I always like to start with this idea that comes, when we look at topography, which might be this left uh, little model here, which is the current elevation. So the elevation as a function of space and time, we could take it apart and we can say, well, it's equal to some elevation at a prior time, plus the tectonic displacements and the geomorphic ones. And a lot of times for our work, what we really care about are the tectonic displacements. We're trying to understand them so that we can explain seismic hazard and understand faulting processes. But the problem is we have to see through the geomorphic displacements. So the other thing we can say is, well, if we can understand the geomorphic displacements, we can exploit them to improve our understanding of the tectonic displacements. So that's how I like to think about this. And this is just a little cartoon of an offset channel, but the concept will apply in general. And so we always like to say that surface processes act to change elevation through erosion and deposition, while the tectonic ones can depress or elevate the surface directly. So let's just one other thing, appreciate the chance to mention open topography. And this is a place where if anybody wants to get some high resolution data of active faults, at least from Western North America, as well as we have beautiful data from New Zealand, you can explore and play. And so there's green is US Geological Survey data that are accessible through OpenTopo, and then the red are some of our own holdings. And most of the major active faults in the Western US have been scanned by airborne laser scanning, and so there's really nice data. So two places I'm going to talk about are a couple examples from the Carrizo Plain, and then I'll talk about the volcanic tableland, and also one other place we'll mention is something in north central Arizona near Prescott, which is where the granite dells are. There's some really good precariously balanced rocks there. So just this is a quick screen cap from this morning for Julian. So I'm not picking on you, Julian. This is meant to be a fond highlight of you, but right behind you is the Dragon's Back. And so the San Andreas Fault here is coming along the back of the Dragon's Back right here. And so this side moves this way and this side moves this direction. But there's also some uplift right in this area right here. It's going up. And we can use that relationship to sort of build some understanding about the topography and topographic metrics. And I see I've got some chats coming in. Yeah, yeah. Don't be afraid, Julian. I just thought I'd make a connection. So I want to acknowledge George Hilly for the collaboration on this and really his leadership on thinking about these problems. But if you have a situation, this would be a map, let's say, of uplift rate. And so there's some zone of high of uplift. And if we can move material through this uplift zone, then we would get some total rock uplift, which is shown on the bottom there. And so as material moves along through the fault, which moves along the fault through this relatively stationary uplift zone, how does the landscape respond? And what can the landscape tell us about the geometry of the uplift and even the rate of deformation? So in this case, what we're going to see is the San Andreas Fault is right here in red. And so this side is going this way and this side's going this way. But really, the way we want to think about it is that this side is fixed and this side is what's really moving. Material is moving just on one side. And so that'll give us a fixed uplift zone through which the material moves and gets this integral of the uplift. So let's look at the observation. So on the top is a movie of 50 centimeter per pixel high resolution topographic data along the Dragon's Back. And you can see it has a steep southeastern end with the fine drainage network. And as we move along it opens up, the drainages become larger and deeper and steeper. But then as we get to the far end, the whole system has kind of reduced in its steepness and the overall curvature and slopes have diminished. And so on the bottom, you can see again the topography. The scale on the right here is 1 kilometer. And what we have done is we mapped it very carefully. And the stratigraphy in this area is there's a pink, a brown, and a orange unit. And we assume that they're pretty uniform to the southeast, and as they move into the Dragon's Back, they've been lifted, and so we see that in the exposure of the geologic map here, where we've eroded down into the material and exposed that purple unit. But we can take these positions that we see now and in a sense sort of tie them to the high resolution topography and determine the total rock uplift. What does it take to lift these contacts? And that gives us some useful information. And so that's what's shown in the middle diagram here, is that there's about 80 meters of total rock uplift in this Dragon's Back pressure ridge. But the key concept then, and this part is maybe something people would object to, it's sort of a model, but we assume that the uplift occurs in a relatively fixed location, right in this area. And so material moves through it, and we use the San Andreas slip rate that's defined nearby at Wallace Creek at about 35 millimeters a year. So we assume that this material moves through this uplift zone at that rate. And so we can convert the distance along the Dragon's Back to time. And so then we can basically differentiate this total rock uplift map with time, and we get an rock uplift rate map. And so we could say that the Dragon's Back is lifting up as much as 2.1 millimeters per year. So that then lets us look at what does the geomorphology tell us? How does the landscape respond? And so the first thing we can see, if we look at relief map, which is on the bottom here, it's basically the ridge elevation surface minus the drainage elevation surface. We can see that the greatest relief is somewhat displaced. It's sort of beyond the uplift zone. And that's because there's a lag. It takes a little bit of time to respond. So the entire landscape is lifting in the uplift zone, both the channels and the ridges. But as we get to once we move beyond that, the channels can cut deeper and we get some increase in relief. So that's important because a lot of times we look at relief as an indicator of relative rock uplift rate, and it can work, but we see that there can be a temporal lag. So with the other thing we can do is look at the kind of classic topographic metrics of channel systems, and what we can see is that there's a kind of a relationship that's typically discussed where the slope is a function of channel steepness times the drainage area to a negative concavity. And what's been shown by people like Kellen Whipple is that the channel steepness is sensitive to rock uplift rate. The concavity is not. It's more sensitive to certain process configurations in the system. So let's look at the channel steepness and see how it compares with rock uplift rate along the Dragon's Back. So this is flipped now, where the left side is the higher, is the uplifting part. And so this is like a profile through that map I showed you 2 slides ago. So we see that maximum uplift rate. We see the relief increasing as we move through the uplift zone, and we get the peak relief kind of just beyond the peak uplift rate. The channel concavity is a little bit complex because of kind of some piracy in the middle here. But the nice thing is we do see that this channel steepness is consistent in the sense that it's higher where the rock uplift rate is high. So it's a sort of a calibration that channel steepness might be useful as a topographic metric to indicate the activity of the system and relative rates of rock uplift. So then the other thing, so that was 2008. And then if you look at the topography along the Dragon's Back, you can see this is the slope distribution. And the key thing to look at here is where it's green and where it's red. And the channel, the ridge top curvature. So if you look here in this part of the Dragon's Back, you can see the ridges are green. And as we move along, the ridges get very narrow. There's very, very narrow zones of ridge, and there's steep, straight walls of the drainages. That's maybe right here in the middle, especially. And then as we move along, we see that the overall system is sort of relaxing. And as we get to the far end or the older end, we see that the ridges are widening. Again, the curvature of the ridge tops is diminishing, but also the walls of the valleys are decreasing in their steepness. And so this was something that was recognized and published in this paper from 2013 by Hurst et al., and also recently rejuvenated in a presentation in a Landscapes Live presentation by Simon Mudd. And what they showed is if you look at basically the erosion rate and relief in dimensionless terms. So this is basically the erosion rate is a function, really a function of hilltop curvature. So how tight is the top of the ridge and normalized by the critical gradient in this landscape, which is maybe 35 degrees. And then the dimensionless relief is basically how steep is the system, and it approaches 1 when the hill slope gradients are equal to this critical gradient. And so what we see is the Dragon's Back shows this really amazing hysteresis where as we move, and so the colors of these dots are distance along the ridge. So as we move into the Dragon's Back, into the uplift zone, we see this increasing relief and increasing dimensionless erosion rate. And the dimensionless erosion rate is basically kind of scaling with the uplift rate. And then we get to some maximum where the landscape is really just driven very hard, and actually it's difficult for it to respond much more. It's very steep and the curvature of the hill slopes is very high. But as soon as the uplift shuts down, it comes back and recovers. And so this to me is very exciting sort of indication of landscape response to this transient uplift, and something we might exploit as we go forward. Okay, so that was my first little story for you. I hope that was interesting. So the second thing is something is surface process modeling to enhance understanding of offset channel markers. And so let's go back to our diagram here. And in this case, we want to talk about geomorphic markers or offset channels. in this case, which are landscape elements for whose geomorphic displacements, erosion and sedimentation, are small enough or understandable enough that the tectonic displacement can be interpreted. So we really care, we're sort of given this, and we're asked to determine this because we want to reconstruct what might have happened in an earthquake. The problem is things are somewhat obscured by the geomorphic displacements. And we hope we understand what the original elevation distribution was. So let's look at this a little bit more, and let's go to a place where many of us have spent a long time thinking about these problems. So we'll go to the Carrizo Plain along the San Andreas Fault. And this work is a collaboration with Olaf Zielke, who's at KAUST. And also there have been some other interesting papers in the last few years by Nadine Reitman and colleagues. But if you look at the high resolution topography along the San Andreas in this area, we see it's just full of beautiful offset channels. And so the geomorphology shows the channels, and you can see that's in this laser scan view at the top. But also what we've learned as we've excavated these channels is that it's a little bit more complicated in the sense that they're not purely just eroding, but there's a lot of cut and fill. And there's also a relationship where there's, for example, this diagram here, the middle left shows purple and brown. So there's channel gravels that we see, but there's also the brown, which is colluvial deposits, which are basically coming from diffusion and bioturbation. So there's kind of a fluvial sedimentation model, what we have, where the channels are basically cut by fluvial processes episodically, then they backfill, so we get the gravel accumulation. But at the same time, there's lateral input of colluvial material that's driven especially by diffusive and biogenic activity. And so here's an example. This is a view of one of these, a channel that's San Andreas would be right behind us. And this is a place where there's many, this is a very vigorous diffuser and bioturbator and endangered species, this little kangaroo rat. But these guys dig and they transport a lot of material, which really drives a change in the landscape. And so one of the things I worked on early was to say, well, let's look at a topographic map here where we have an initial 2-meter deep channel with a 5-meter offset. What would happen after 500 years? How would it look with this diffusion? And this 8 square meters per 1,000 year nonlinear diffusion is kind of the assumption for how the surface processes are functioning. And then you can see that on the bottom here, I've sort of sliced along this topographic profile how things might look, where there's the original channel was fairly simply notched, but after time we have this diffused relationship and filling and erosion. And then this could be, of course, more complicated where we have cut and fill. So the topography itself is simple compared to the subsurface relationships with these cut and fill but preserved sharp boundaries. So these multiple surfaces we might have to track if we're doing a 3D paleoseismic investigation. So what Olaf and I have done, and really Olaf, is work to basically pull together a couple of different tools into a diffusion, into a sort of a MATLAB-based GUI, and we use a nonlinear diffusion model from Di Michele, Venturi, and Arrowsmith. And what we can do is sort of set up this initial surface topography, the channel and storm systems, and then the offset. So what kind of earthquakes are put into the system? And obviously this is a complex diagram. Let's just look at the graphics here. So we set up the topography. This is completely arbitrary. So this is now, we are inspired by the Carrizo Plain, but we're just doing a simulation. So we set up some topography. It's a sloping surface with a little bit of roughness. And then we compute a drainage network across this topography. And we set up a fault trace. And then we just use a smaller piece of this domain, which is shown in this little box, but we have the landscape beyond that domain to make sure there's no edge effects. And so we zoom into this little box, and we can sort of compute the interaction between offsets and the surface processes. And so here is kind of time going to the right and different processes going vertically. And so this is every 100 years having a magnitude 7.5 earthquake, and then every 40 years having an erosion event or incision event. But the whole time we're diffusing. And so you can see here's our initial landscape, a little 40-meter by 40-meter piece of topography. Nothing happens at 40 years, but at 80, we cut a channel. And then at 100, so right before an earthquake, this channel has smoothed. But then at 120, we have this little snapshot here. We can see a really pretty little offset channel that's been smoothed a bit by diffusion. And then after 200 years here, it's smooth, and there's going to be an earthquake just immediately after. Actually, sorry, that would be at the bottom here. So let's kind of narrate this again. So we form the channel at 40 years, we fill it, then we go here 80, we take that same channel, it's diffused a bit, we cut, backfill, here we are, diffuse, and then earthquake. And then here's 120 years, so a little bit of diffusion, we cut and fill, same thing here. At 200 years, diffuse, now there's an incision event, cut, fill, earthquake. And so here's what it looks after 500 years. So this is a little bit more complicated maybe than we might have originally thought, but it's trying to capture what we've observed in the field. And here's what happens if we change the diffusion rate. So what might this look like with different landscapes, different environments? And so the top is a more diffusive, more vigorous erosional system. And then the bottom would be a less vigorous system. And so you can see in these lower diffusion rate environments, the landscape preserves a sharper set of landforms. And here's a power loss storm. So just exploring maybe the storms aren't quite so regular and their magnitude might not be that regular. So we can build sort of more complex landforms. And what's also important is sometimes we don't make a channel. And that's important because when a lot of times when we look at these offset distributions of small channels, we assume that groups of offsets represent successive earthquakes. But if we're not producing enough markers between earthquakes, that can give us a problem. This also lets us make things like a beheaded channel here, for example. And so then here's the anatomy of a longer offset. So this would be 1,000 years with this earthquake every 100 years, and then steady diffusion and 80-year storms. So we make it, we go through time kind of sort of vertically and then over. And so you can see some really interesting features. For example, the feature here that I'm interested to see the outcome of this is that the fault trace is here, and we see that the channel cuts or crosses the fault a little bit obliquely. And that's not structural at all. It's purely a geomorphic effect of the fact that this part of the channel wall is a little bit older. And so it's been sort of diffused or sort of pushed our main channel away from the fault trace a bit. Okay, so that was the second part of my story. And I'll move into the third vignette. So machine learning, robot mapping, and particle dynamics in 2 and 3D for fault scarps and precariously balanced rocks. So now we're going to go to another place very interesting in California. I guess I apologize for my California-centric examples for this group, but this is what I know well. So in Eastern California, we're in a zone of transtension, and this location, the volcanic tableland, is a spectacular laboratory of active faulting. And transtension is the main point. So these are normal faults that we're going to look like obliquely oriented within this system. And so here you can see the volcanic tableland. We're looking south with Sierra Nevada on the right and the White Mountains on the left. And these features to our left are fault scarps. But what's really important about this location is that the surface that we're looking at is the top of the Bishop Tuff, which is a 760,000-year-old ignimbrite. And it was emplaced and then it's been faulted. So we kind of have a sense of when the scarps began to form. The faults were probably there before, but then the fault deformation had to sort of propagate up through the ignimbrite. So let's look at these rocky fault scarps. And so we've been working, this is with my colleagues in my department, especially Yang Chen and Janeshwar Das, and there's a couple papers we've published or are in review. So the first thing is, if you look at this fault scarp, this is unlike a simple scarp that would be purely transport limited. Here we have to deal with the fact that it's rocky, but the main fault comes along like this, and we see that the fault scarp then is comprised of kind of the footwall would be this rock mass that's fractured, and so you can see the original volcanic columns maybe in here. And then so those volcanic columns are then broken by faulting, and the material is transported and falls down the face of the scarp. And so we have these big particles. So our hypothesis is we can characterize, if we can understand the particle distribution in its size distribution, we might be able to say a little bit about the relative rate of faulting along this zone, and understand sort of the contributions of the different fracturing processes. So let's look at our next picture. You know, what's the rock geomorphology problem here? These rocky fault scarps are not well characterized by alluvial or bedrock models, so it's a fractured mass instead of a solid rock mass. And so the challenge of understanding them is the production of transportable material and the subsequent movement. Can we establish a system to characterize the particles? And what we can say, what I just summarized, is there's three processes of fracturing: the volcanic fracturing, the initial cooling driven fracturing, the tectonic fracturing associated with the faulting itself, and then the geomorphic driven fracturing, which is the particle collisions as well as the thermal cycling as these rocks sit out in this desert environment for hundreds of thousands of years. So what we've come up with is a simple mapping of rock traits. So the cross-sectional area of these rocks, which is kind of, it gives us a grain size, the eccentricity of them. So are they more circular or more elliptical in their shapes? And once we know the eccentricity, we can think about their long axis orientation. So what we've done is develop this data-driven geomorphology pipeline where we fly our drone along the fault scarp, and using structure from motion, compute digital elevation models and orthophotography. But then we use deep learning. We annotate the images to map out the particles, and we can basically produce a map of rocks. And then that gives us some sense of understanding of how these faults are working. So we're using this deep neural network approach, which is what is really pretty exciting, popular. People are really going crazy with it these days. And this is an object-oriented one. So it's sort of, how do we take an image and put meaning to the pixels? And the picture on the right shows how this might be used to map an airplane and people, or when people say, well, how do you know there's so many pictures of cats on the internet? This is basically using a mask sort of convolutional neural network approach to characterize these different objects in these pictures. And so here's what we've done. We take an input picture. So this is just an ortho photo, and we use this approach, and we put in, so what's important is we put in the color, the ortho mosaic tiles, but we also use elevation as a couple of additional channels. And we run through this in a sort of pyramidal approach, but we can basically come out with a map of rocks. And so you might say, well, is this interesting or not? I think it's amazing, actually, because the input image on the left then turns into a map of semantic map of individual rocks. So each one of these is a different rock, and then we can characterize their traits, including the sizes. So we can make a map like the one shown in the middle here, where the rocks are color-coded by their sizes. And in this sense, it's just the area, the cross-sectional area. But the amazing thing is there's like 12,000 rocks on this fault scarp. And so that's what this is showing right here. So we've tipped the fault scarp on its end. So we're just looking at distance along the fault scarp versus position in this upper one. So each one of these dots is a rock. And then it's a little bit hard to see, but there every 4 meters, I take a little bin and I just count how many particles. So there's between 100 and a few tens of particles in each of these bins. And then I can start to calculate things like the size distribution. And so a typical way of characterizing sediment is to convert the diameter. So we take the area of the rock, we convert that to an equivalent diameter. So we just assume it's a circle for right now. And then we take the negative log 2 of that diameter to get the phi, which is a typical grain size measure. And so one of the things we can come up with is the average grain size of rocks on this fault scarp is about the size of an American football. But also what's important is their shapes are like an American football. So we can look at their long axes and look at the way they've been transported and rolled down the slope. And this is one thing we cited was some really interesting work by Jim McAlpin once about looking at the sedimentary fabrics of particles that are deposited in colluvial wedges. But the thing we can see is the grain size distribution here, this histogram. And the key thing is how this on the left side, which is where the larger particles are, we think we can use this shape to basically tell us about the proportions or the process trade-offs. And so what we see is the largest particles, which would be then these large MD phis, are in places where the fault scarp is more complex. And so probably that's where we're accessing those original volcanic columns. So this is exciting to me because it's like how would you count and study 12,000 rocks just along the scarp, or 80,000 total particles, which is what this little red map shows. So this granulometry is something we can maybe use to try to understand the processes on fault scarps better. And we're just really just getting going. So I have one final bit here on precariously balanced rocks. So I'm going to 3D now. So we want to, we've sort of shown you we can find rocks in 2 dimensions. What about 3D? So localization and mapping of sparse fragile geologic features with unpiloted aircraft systems. This is a paper that's in review right now in the Journal of Robotics. And we think that, the typical way people have looked at PBRs is kind of taken individual ones and really studied them in great detail. But the idea we have is that large data sets of spatially explicit PBR fragility might, with detailed geomorphic and geologic context, could provide valuable assessment of sensitivity to ground motions. So we need to find all the PBRs in a landscape. And the idea, maybe people know PBRs or not, but we can look at their fragility, which often is the kind of simply characterized as the angle between the vertical sort of the gravity vector from the centroid and the rocking points. What's the minimum angle? But instead of looking at an individual one, what if we could look at many of them? And so we'd have a kind of a probability distribution of fragility for different landscapes. And that would then help us understand the geomorphic controls on the formation, preservation, and destruction of precariously balanced rocks, but also the shaking that drives them and knocks them over, which is what we care about in terms of earthquake recurrence. So what we've been working on, what Xiang's been working on, is finding these with a drone. And so the idea is that we use rock localization. So we use that same machine learning approach that we used for finding the rocks on the fault scarp to find a PBR. Once we find it, then we fly in this kind of conical mode to characterize it in 3D, and then we move on. And so this is an example where you see the trajectory of the robot, the drone, but robotically doing this, and it finds 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of these sparse PBRs, maps them, and moves to the next. So I should say sparse is key. So this is very difficult if there's a lot of them, but if they're separated, we can find them and map them. So then once we find them, what do we do? And so, a lot of work has been done on trying to understand how these precariously balanced rocks or fragile geologic features in general respond to ground motions. And there's 2 kinds of ground motions. There's the threshold motions of rocking, sliding, and slide rocking. So, what does it take to just knock them over or topple or not? And this is work we've started to also do in collaboration with Christine Wittich. But one of the things we've been doing is bringing in physics or game engines, well, physics engines that are often used in the gaming industry to build to enable realistic, accurate physics-based behavior, including rigid body dynamics of arbitrary features in the scene. So we use this one piece of software called Open Dynamics, and we're working on validating it just to make sure everyone's going to trust it. But it seems to work really well for, you know, simple objects like these pillars and on this sort of ideally shake table. But we can also then use more complex objects like we might see in the field, and then do this many times to understand sort of the uncertainty of the behavior. And so here's just one example here of where we take two PBRs that sit on top of a granite outcrop. So the PBRs are these sort of copper features, and we displace that uh, landscape. We have just a 1 meter displacement in 1 second. And you can see then that the upper rock just rocks, but the lower one starts to turn and it falls and it rests. And so this is all totally calculated inside the software environment. But it's really amazing because we can do both the threshold displacements, or, you know, rocking, sliding, and toppling, but we can also do what's called the large displacement problem, which is where do they go and end up. And that's what we're showing here, which is these three objects, A, B, and C, in their initial positions. We just, for now, have a really simple earthquake ground motion, which is just 2 meters, just boom, move to the right. But we can then calculate how these objects fall and where they end up. And so we think this is really promising for trying to improve our understanding of precariously balanced rocks, given the great complexity that they represent, both in a simple geometric sense, but also in terms of the geomorphology. So I apologize, I've gone on just a little bit long, but I'm now done. And so what I've tried to tell you about was the ideas of improving deformation rate characterization using topographic metrics. So that was the dragon's backstory. Trying to decrease epistemic uncertainty with surface process explorations to understand how markers form. And that was the second example. And then the third one was this one of exploiting complex geomorphology to improve understanding of fragile geologic features. So with that, I'll stop and thank everyone for your attention.
Ramon, thank you very much for this great